About questions, I really want to be able to answer everyone's questions. The way that we're set up here with, thank God we have a nice crowd. I don't know if I'm going to be able to take everyone's personal questions during class. The chat box will remain on. I will save the chat box questions. So if we don't get to them at the end of the class, I can answer them in the beginning of the class. Something else that I hope to be doing is, I don't know if all of you have heard of it, but there's a great new app called Schmoozy, which allows me to create forums and different conversations. What I want to do is to take, after this Zoom Tanya class, I want to be able to hopefully upload the video on Schmoozy, but then be able to create a forum and discussion from whatever we learned from class. You can post a question there. And what I love about that forum is I can answer by text, or I can also voice note and give you an answer that way, which for me is so much easier than like Tanya's, involved. It's much easier to be able to talk your answer than to just, have to type it. So there'll be a lot of different things that I'll, keep you posted along the way. And I think that covers like technical stuff. Oh, one more thing. I really, really, really appreciate feedback. You want to tell me I'm doing great? Go right ahead. If you want to tell me where something can go better, that's where I really want to hear from you. This is really, really new for me. I've never done anything like this. So I'm sure that there will be plenty of room for improvement. And I want to hear from you what's working, what's not working. And like I said before, the more faces I can see, the better. I love to see your face. I love to see your reaction. Usually I can tell if someone's super confused. I'll be like, okay, we need to explain that more. But if I'm talking to a bunch of black screens, it's hard to do that. I also understand, I am a mom. It is the middle of the day. I understand that if you're doing other things while listening to this class, I really, really, really am okay with that. And if you need to leave your screen off, I'm totally cool. But if you are just, able to open your screen and join me face to face, super amazing. Okay, so here we go. We are going to start with a little bit of an introduction. And what Tanya is something that you can study peripherally and you can go into so much detail and depth. What we're going to be doing, what I envision for this class, and hopefully we'll get to finish the whole book of Tanya together, is that we're going to kind of be taking like a bird's eye view. We're going to be looking at this Tanya with like the big concepts, the concepts that we are going to be using to practically impact our lives. So we might not, if you have learned Tanya already, you might realize that I'm going to be skipping over some stuff or I haven't touched upon certain areas. That's intentional. It's because there are certain things that I want to focus on. And I also am very aware that we have, thank God, people from all over the world with different Tanya backgrounds. Some are not even sure what Tanya is, and some have learned Tanya many times. Let's all come with a blank slate and we can, we'll do this together. And for me, even like every time I prepare for Tanya, I always learn something new. So I'm hoping that the way we're learning and how we learn is going to offer a fresh perspective, even if Tanya is something that you're familiar with. So basics. What is Chassidus? Right? What Tanya is a book of Chassidus, right? So what is Chassidus? And Chassidus is, and I love this translation of Chassidus, is because basically it's the worldview and the way life uses the most important and esoteric and mystical concepts, but in a way that's supposed to impact and affect your life in a practical way. So Chassidus is taking something, the loftiest part of the Torah, the most mystical, intense parts of the Torah, but we're using it in the most practical way. So we're literally going from highest to lowest. And that is the beauty of Chassidus, the ability to take these concepts and really apply them. My Tanya class is not about how much knowledge you're going to gain and all the technical stuff you're going to learn. It's really about how are we taking these concepts and applying them to our lives. I like to call Tanya like the OG self-help book, because the more you learn Tanya, the more you realize how practical it is. And I'm very, very involved in the therapeutic world with my therapist, my kids' therapist. I talk to therapists all day. It's like my full-time job. And the more I study Tanya, the more I like realize like this is the source. This is where all these, smart, like it's all sourced in Torah. It all comes from here. And it's been so fascinating to, see how this happens. Okay. So we want to be able to apply what we're learning, and like actually apply it to make it applicable to our lives. One thing that I forgot to tell you is at the end, the last 5 minutes of the Tanya class, we will end with a short meditation. Trust me, meditation is really difficult for me, but when it's in little 5-minute bites, I think it's really doable. And why I do it this way is because Tanya, first of all, is the biggest proponent of meditation. That's one of the main tools of Tanya that are used. And also I want to end the class with you just being able to calmly block out the noise and walk away with something like a little sound bite that you can take with you through the rest of the week. So we will do that at the end of the class. Okay, so we have a little bit of a broader view of what Hasidus is. So now what is Tanya? Tanya is the book that the Alter Rebbe wrote. And just to give a little bit of a background, the Alter Rebbe was the first Chabad Rebbe, and he was the student of the Maggid, who was the student of the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov is the one that introduced Hasidus into the world. So the Baal Shem Tov had something like 60 students. The Maggid had 120 students. From the Maggid, all his 120 students went on to be Hasidic rabbis in their own dynasties. They took Hasidus teachings and made them personal and created their own paths. The Alter Rebbe was one of these students, and he created Chabad Hasidus. Now, what's Chabad Hasidus? What does Chabad mean? Okay, Chabad is an acronym for Chachma, Bina, Das, wisdom, understanding, knowledge. We will get more into that as the chapters go on, but basically it's intellectual. And why is that so important? Because the stereotypical chassid was explained and viewed as a very emotional relationship with God. What did that look like? Hours and hours of prayer. Sometimes it looked like, extreme, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like restrictions. And it was just very, very, very intense, emotional, and with a lot of feeling, not so much intellectual. Comes along the Alter Rebbe and he says, we are going to serve God with our mind, and our mind is going to control our heart. And we are going to learn later on how important joy is in the service of God. But the most important part is that we control our mind. We control the things that we think, when we control the things that we think, it then controls how we feel, and we will get into that in depth. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe decided that he was the leader of the Chabad Hasidic movement. And basically, how did the book of Tanya come about? Everyone wanted to speak to the Alter Rebbe personally, right? Everyone came to him with their existential spiritual crises. And the Alter Rebbe realized that there's no way that he's going to be able to answer every single person's question all the time. And then he also realized that so many people are coming with the same question. So why not, save time and be practical and make sure that everyone has access to this information? So he started writing the Tanya. Tanya was first written in pamphlets that were distributed, then it was printed and bound into a book. Now, what is so special about that is that the Tanya is basically like having a private audience with the Alter Rebbe. When you are studying Tanya, you are literally going, the Tanya has a specific order, which we'll talk about, and you're asking your questions, and the Alter Rebbe is answering you. It's like a personal, private audience. Like if you were to ask this question to the Alter Rebbe, this is what he would tell you. Now, we said before that Chabad is an intellectual chassid. We take the study of mysticism and we understand it, and then we can take it to heart. So for example, this is the trajectory. It's until we understand it in our intellect, then we feel it in our emotions, and then it affects our behavior. And that is really the whole point of the Tanya, to teach us how to do that. How are we starting with our brain, then moving to our heart and moving to our actions? We don't want to act on impulse. We want to have this thought process of how we think and feel. Now, the Tanya is laid out as is not, you would think that it might be like almost like a Hasidic encyclopedia, right? Like look up something, you want to know what this something means, you look it up, you find out, whatever. That is not what the Tanya is. The Tanya is not an encyclopedia, because how is an encyclopedia organized? Through alphabetical order. That is not how the Tanya is organized. The Tanya is organized in a thought out succession of what comes first, right? So it is informational. It is informational and inspiration. So you're not going to, like, if you're looking for a book that you can just like flip through and say, oh, what is Kalipa? I need to look that up. The Tanya is not going to like have that organized for you in that way. It is strictly a informational book where you are going along on this trajectory. It's kind of like a recipe, right? Or when you get an instruction manual, like there's a method to the madness, right? There's a reason why this comes first and that comes next, and it all follows a particular order. And you're not going to want to do, you can't do the end of the instructions before you do the beginning, or you'll be miscombobulated. So there's a very thought out order to this book, and it is an informational book. And it is a book that will, it's an instructional book, not an informational book. An encyclopedia would be information. Tanya, something like instruction. It's we take this and we learn and we use it practically. Okay, so let me just see. I do have notes. I was going to make sure that I refer to them. Okay, so like a recipe, when you are starting cooking, right? And you open your cookbook and you have a recipe, and your recipe gives you instructions for how to go about what you're making, right? And if you follow the recipe correctly, your end result should work, right? You should have a functional end result. But before you get to the recipe, what do you need to know? Before you get to the recipe, you need to know the ingredients, right? Like, what are the ingredients that you need to make this recipe? So the first couple chapters in the Tanya are going to be telling us like the ingredients of what do we need to know before we get to the actual instructional process. We need to have a few terms under our belts, a few concepts under our belt before we can actually get to the part where it's actually practical. So the first couple chapters, and I believe it's like the first 8 chapters, we're going to be learning all the foundational concepts that we need to then transition into a practical, instructional, informative way of living. So what is it that we want at the end of this? At the end of our Tanya experience, what are we expecting to have? So I'm going to say a word that's going to be a real trigger on purpose, because we're going to talk about that. What we're trying to achieve at the end of the 53 chapters is perfection. Oh my gosh, I said it. Perfection. Now, don't freak out, because perfection has a lot of different definitions, and we're going to be using perfection in not the way that you think. So, basically what we're going to discuss, and I am going to be like jumping ahead and kind of giving you a little spoiler alert so we know what we're going to be talking about in the future, but it's not necessarily in chapter 1, but it helps us kind of integrate and understand what's going on. So what we're going to learn is that there's a big difference between who I am and what I do. Okay? Let that sink in. Who I am and what I do are not always the same thing. We can't necessarily be perfect, but we can do perfect. Okay? And we're going to talk about what that means. Now, I can't tell you how to see reality because that's what our mind does. I can't tell you how to feel about reality. That's our heart, right? But what the Tanya is going to teach us is how to make the right choices. That is something that's in our control. So how we see things and how we feel and who we are at our core, we might not be perfect at our core, but we can learn how to have perfect behaviors. Okay. We can learn how to have impulse control. We can learn how to make choices and understand where our control lies. Are you with me so far? Did anyone be like, oh, I'm out of here? This isn't, like, I don't like the sound of this. I'm out. Stick with me. I'm telling you, it's going to be good. So what does that mean? Now, we are going to be introduced to different categories of people. One of the categories of people that we're going to be introduced, actually not really until chapter 12, but I'm going to give you a little sneak peek so you can understand what's happening here, is a person called the Beinoni. The Beinoni, and we're going to get into him. We're going to get into who this person really is in much more depth later. But just briefly, a Beinoni is someone who's emotionally conflicted, but behaviorally perfect. Okay? So he has a ton of conflict inside of us. He himself in his core is not perfect, but he has mastered the ability to behave perfectly. Okay? Now, why is this so important? Because another name for this book is called Sefer HaBeinonim. This is our goal. Our ultimate goal is to be someone who can act perfectly, but doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. Okay? So this is our end result of the recipe. Now, we're going to learn, I want to just make a little disclaimer. We're going to learn how important it is that sometimes we can get so distracted by the goal that we forget the process. And the Tanya will constantly remind us that more important than the goal is actually the process and the effort we put into the goal. So keep that in mind so you don't get overwhelmed by, oh my gosh, here I am being told that I can have perfect behaviors and I can choose how I behave and I can have impulse control and I can act perfectly. It could be really overwhelming and you just want to run away. Don't let that happen. We are doing this in little bitty tiny bites, and the Tanya, we're going to do this with the Tanya. It's going to help us break this down in manageable ways and practical ways where you're going to be able to actionably, was that a word? Whatever. Make little changes in your life that you're going to see huge differences. And actually my favorite part of learning Tanya is that before you even apply anything to the Tanya, before you actually practically take some of the Tanya into your life, you just are going to automatically see the world differently without even trying. You're going to learn something. You're going to learn how the inner workings of the world is. You're going to learn how the inner workings of your soul is and your body is. And you're going to automatically see it differently. Without even trying, without even meditating, without even employing any of the tools that the Tanya is going to give us, you're going to automatically start to look at the world differently. Okay. So that was all a little bit of an introduction. Now we're going to get into chapter 1. What does chapter 1 start with? Chapter 1 starts with, remember, if any questions, just put it in the chat box. I can see it. If it's something that I can answer in the middle of the class, I will. If not, we will wait to the end, or I will provide other ways to answer questions. I don't want anybody to come away feeling confused or overwhelmed. That is the exact opposite of the intention. Okay, so if that's happening for you, please let me know. Okay, so chapter 1, we start off with a passage, a pasuk from the Gemara, and it says, before you were born, the soul took an oath to be a tzaddik. I'm going to translate that word in a minute, and not to be a rasha. And even if the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik, you should view yourself as a rasha. Okay? Kind of bold statement, right? Our soul takes an oath before it comes down into this world, that we are supposed to be a tzaddik and not a Rasha. But if someone tells you you're a tzaddik, don't believe them, right? Like it's a very, and the Tanya is going to take this phrase and analyze it over many different chapters. So we're not going to get to understanding this complete phrase right away, but we're going to start to take it apart. Okay. Now, I said the word Rasha and I said the word tzaddik. There is no really great English explanation for these words, because saying that tzaddik is a righteous person and saying Rasha is a wicked person is not accurate. Okay. So we're going to give these words Tanya definitions, and I'm hoping from then on, I'm going to refer this to tzaddik and Rasha and not in the English definition, because I don't want to say righteous and I don't want to say wicked, because the furthest thing for a Rasha is a wicked. That's not the right translation. So we're going to define this according to the Tanya, and then we're going to be reusing these Hebrew terms. Is everybody okay with that? Nod your head. Okay, good. Okay, so the definition of a tzaddik, according to Tanya, is someone who has perfect insides and perfect outsides, right? We said the Beinoni before, he can act perfectly, but his insides are not perfect. That's the tzaddik he doesn't need impulse control. He is perfect inside, perfect outside. Everything he does is congruent with God. Now, if you want to take I know where I fall, which category I fall into. I can't speak for all of you. I think most of the world falls into the Rasha category, which we'll explain. But if you want to take the tzaddik test at home, this is what you do. Act on every single impulse that comes to your brain. Okay? If at the end of the day, you have only acted holy, you're a tzaddik. Okay? Simple as that. Chances are, I guess in my life, that is not going to happen. If I acted on every impulse, I'd be in a very bad place, right? So this is my point. A tzaddik does not need to think before he speaks. He doesn't need to think before he acts. He doesn't have to have this constant grip on his actions, and he doesn't have to constantly rethink and think everything. Anything that he wants to do, anything that comes out of his mouth or out of his whatever or his actions will be perfect, because his insides are perfect. Now, if you remember, what's our goal? Our goal is to be a Beinoni. Being a tzaddik is not even on our radar. We are not even supposed to be striving for that. That is something that happens once or twice in a generation, and that is a godly thing that God decides who's going to be a tzaddik. Don't even put that in your like radar. This is not our goal. Our goal is not to be perfect on the inside. Okay? So like, that is something that we just take off the table, but it's really important for us to understand to give us context, because we're going to really delve into what is a Beinoni, and to understand, we need to understand the contrast of what a tzaddik is and what a Rasha is. Okay, so now we know what a tzaddik is. What's a Rasha? Somebody who can't always control their behavior. Simple as that. Okay, a tzaddik is not a wicked person. A tzaddik doesn't have behavioral control. Now you may ask, well, how often? It doesn't matter, because if you don't have behavioral control at all times, you are not a Beinoni, because a Beinoni has behavioral control. He doesn't have perfect insides, but he has perfect outsides. And you're definitely not a tzaddik. You're somebody who struggles on the inside and also struggles on the outside. Sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. Sometimes we act godly and sometimes we act not godly. Okay. So I don't want you to ever think when we say Rasha, we are equating that with wicked or evil or anything really negative, right? Because this is not the point. The point is God created us basically as a Rasha, as somebody who doesn't have behavioral control. And what we're trying to do is slowly but surely gain more and more behavioral control. That is our mission in life. That's what our purpose is down here in this world. Okay. Yes. Okay. So like, it's just a quick example of like a Rasha, right? Like, let's say you're going to Someone just said, can I use she and her instead of he and him? Absolutely. Yes. Actually, it's very interesting because the soul is actually in the Torah is referred to as a she. So I don't know why I automatically go to him and he. But I will try to make that more inclusive. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so for example, let's say you're going on a long drive in middle of the night and you want to go with a responsible driver, right? And so you ask this driver, like, have you ever fallen asleep on the road? And he's like, not one time a few years ago I did, but usually I don't. Usually I don't fall asleep at the wheel. Does that give you confidence? Like, not really, right? You want someone who's going to say 100%, I've never, ever fallen asleep at the wheel and I'm not going to, right? Like that's something that's going to give you confidence. So it's just an example of saying like, it doesn't really, for the Russia, it doesn't really matter how often you lose behavioral control. The fact is that you lose behavioral control sometimes, right? And the Russia is such a huge category, which we're going to talk about later. I believe in chapters 9 and 10, or, somewhere around there, we're going to talk more about the category of people that the Russia encompasses, which is most of the world. Most of the world falls into this category. So when you view yourself as a Russia, this is not, you should feel really proud and something that this is who we are. And we're striving for this ultimate goal of the Beinoni. Okay. So, so we understand that we're not supposed to be, we want to we're supposed to be at tzaddik, which we'll talk about later, why the term is tzaddik. We don't want to be a Russia, but we don't really understand what these categories are. And so how do we even go about this? So the Tanya starts off saying the key to understanding the different categories of people is to understand the Kabbalistic understanding of the two souls that are inside of us, okay? We are born with two souls. Chaim Vital, a very great Kabbalist, discussed that in every single one of us are two souls, okay? Now, what are these two souls? Chapter 1 really only gets into the first soul, and then chapter 2, we delve into more of the second soul. So we are left with a little bit of a cliffhanger. We'll touch on the second soul a little bit, but we're mainly going to be talking about the first soul, okay? The first soul is called the enlivening soul. A lot of people use the term animal soul only because it's the soul that animals have, only because it's animalistic. It's very, what's the word I'm looking for? Physical, right? It's all about the physical needs. Okay. So when you have an animalistic desire, that's why it's called the animal soul. Really, we like to call it the enlivening soul because it's the soul that actually gives us physical life, right? Our life comes from this first soul. What is the drive of this soul? This soul is all about survival, self-preservation. Okay. Eat, sleep, procreate, all the things that are going to make sure that we're still alive. So it's very, very physical and it's very, very selfish. Selfish, not in an immoral, negative way. It's just selfish because what we want to do is we want to stay alive. Okay. And this is the sole purpose of the animal soul is a selfish purpose, is to stay alive. Now, sometimes staying alive kind of morphs into what gives me pleasure, right? That also comes from the animal soul. But the source of the animal soul is enlivening. It is completely selfish, is going to do whatever it takes to stay alive. So for example, like a baby, right? A baby, first of all, why is it the first soul? Because it's the soul we get first. We get the enlivening soul into our body before we get our godly soul. And a baby, what is the soul? What does a baby do? Eat, sleep, drink, cry. And how do they get their needs met? They cry and they make sure they get their needs met. Why do they cry in the middle of the night and they disturb you? Do they feel bad when they cry and keep you up in the middle of the night? No, because they need to stay alive. That is their way for staying alive. So that's the best way to describe this animalistic enlivening soul is its survival. Its sole goal is to survive, and it will do whatever it takes to survive. And sometimes that goes against what the godly soul decides that we need. And then this is where the conflict happens. Okay. So so remember, this is not it's not an immoral soul. It's an amoral soul. Okay. It's not about morals. This is about self-preservation. Okay. So this soul is all about physical animalistic needs. The second soul, which we're going to really get into more next week, but just so we have a little bit of a contrast, is selflessness. Okay. It's the exact opposite of your enlivening soul. Okay. Its sole purpose is to reunite with God, is to connect, to combine itself with the godly light, right? Like it's constantly striving to reunite with God. What is that? Complete selflessness, right? So we have two souls within us. One is completely selfish, one is completely selfless, and they live inside of us, wanting two opposite things. What do you think that feels like? Have you ever had a really spiritual experience and have been like so inspired, and you're all in, and you're like, wow, I feel so connected to God. You walk out of the synagogue, or you walk out of the class, or you walk out of the spiritual environment, and you see I don't know, this amazing restaurant, and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's all about the delicious food. And you completely forget about the spirituality. Not that food is negative. Food is very, very positive and can be used in a very positive way. But my point is that we are human beings that sometimes we feel like we have multiple personalities. And you know why we feel that way? Because we do. We have two souls. What's a great example of that is Rivka, when she was pregnant with twins, she was going crazy. Why was she going crazy? Because when she would pass a holy place, she would feel kicking. When she would pass a place of idolatry, she would feel kicking, and she was going crazy. She's like, what's happening? I have a child in me that has split personalities. Is he holy? Is he not holy? What's going on here? So he went to the sages, and they said, no, you have two babies inside of you. So, and she was relieved. Why was she relieved? Because she understood what was happening a little bit more. So we have to view ourselves the same way. We have two alive, kicking souls that are kicking us in opposite directions. So when you feel like you're going crazy, and why sometimes am I so holy, and why sometimes am I so mundane and physical, and why do I feel like I'm all over the place? You know why? It's because you have two souls, and you have two souls within you that want two opposite things. And that's how God created you. So you're not crazy. You just have to figure out how to navigate this situation where you have two things inside of you that want completely different things. So one of the most powerful things that I took away from this chapter was when I learn it every time, I'm like, it makes, oh, I'm not crazy. Oh, it's okay that I feel two opposing things at once. Not only is it okay, of course I'm going to feel that. I have these two souls within me that want me to do two opposite things, and they're fighting, and each one fights for complete control. None of them are working. They're not working together. They want complete control of you. So that could be crazy making. And I just come away with that feeling like a little bit like Rivka did when she spoke to the wise sage, telling her that she had two babies, like, oh, I have two souls inside of me. Of course it feels crazy at times, right? Like that's how it's supposed to be. Now, the question is how do we slowly but surely allow our godly soul to dominate and not our enlivening soul? Okay. Are you with me so far? Okay. Any questions in the chat box? I can see them coming up right now, so I can interrupt for a question. Okay. So what we're going to learn and understand is the purpose for this conflict. Like, why were we created with such conflict? Like, why do we need that, right? And also, we are going to learn methods and techniques to manage the conflict. Okay? So now we know we have major conflict inside of us, every single one of us. Okay, why? Why do we need that conflict? we're going to get into that, but I'm sure you can imagine, like, if we came down here perfect, what would be the point, right? Like, we understand, we know that we're here to character develop, to change the world, to change ourselves. If we came in here all tzaddikim, what would be the purpose, right? So we can understand a little bit of why there's a conflict inside of us, and we'll understand more as Tanya goes on. But God can't just put two souls inside of us, create such conflict, and not give us tools to figure out how to manage the conflict, right? And this is where Tanya is so powerful, because this is literally the instructional book of how are we going to manage the conflict inside of us. Okay. So we have internally two souls that are always going to be vying for complete control. Okay. Now we know that. We know, remember, the first 8 chapters, we're getting base knowledge. Okay. What do we know so far? Okay. We know that there's different categories of people, right? We have a tzaddik, we have a rasha, and we have Beinoni. Most of us are going to fall into the rasha category. And what's our goal? We want to get closer and closer and closer to this Beinoni character. Okay. So now we know that. So we have some of those things down. We also know that we have two souls, right? We have an enlivening soul and we have a godly soul. We don't know much about the godly soul yet, because we're going to get into that next chapter. We're going to talk about what's the makeup of the soul. How does it work? How do we express it? All those things we're going to be talking about next chapter. Okay. So internally, we have two souls that are always vying control. Externally, we want to manage behaviors so our godly soul is in control and our animal soul can be like the backseat driver, right? What happens when our godly soul is in control and our animal, we're not eradicating our animal soul, right? That's only a tzaddik that can do that. Our animal soul is always going to be there, but we are going to be, if we can have our godly soul be in the driver's seat, we're going to be able to achieve behavioral perfection. Yeah? Will we all be tzaddikim in the world to come of Mashiach? I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't understand how Mashiach works, honestly. Like, if you want to know my honest opinion, I really hope Mashiach comes. And especially, I think during this year, we're like all davening for Mashiach. But for me to wrap my brain around the concept of Mashiach and how are we going to live our regular life? Are we going to only want good? How does that work? Are we, is everyone's coming back to life? Like, what happens if you have 2 marriages? Like, what the heck happens? I don't know. So I have no idea what's going to happen with Mashiach. I'm assuming from some of my knowledge that when Mashiach comes, you will have a holier drive. Like, we will not have this constant conflict inside of us. We will almost, like, if we act impulsively, probably holiness is going to come out. But that's all just assumptions and conjecture. I have no idea. So I'm sure there's a lot of great rabbis you can ask that question to, but if they give you a complete answer, I don't trust them. Like, nobody knows. Anyhow. So, okay. So this is what I want. This is what we covered in this class. We covered basically a little bit of an introduction, right? We understand a little bit more of like what's Hasidus. Hasidus is something that takes mystical teachings and allows us to apply it practically in our lives. We understand a little bit of what Tanya is, right? Who the Alter Rebbe is. He's the disciple of the Maggid, who's the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, who's the one that introduced Hasidus to the world, right? And now we have the Alter Rebbe who took Hasidus, which was a very emotional, kind of extreme behavioral experience, to something that's more intellectual. Chabad Hasidus is based on intellect because everything comes from the brain. Okay. Now this is another therapeutic thing that you learn, even if you're involved with therapists, like people will say like, oh, but I feel this way. And I, like our feelings come from our heart. Yes, our feelings come from our heart, but it originates in your brain and how you think and how you view the world. How you view the world is going to directly impact how you think, which directly impacts how you feel, which directly impacts how you behave. How powerful is that? Right? Like, we have so much power, right? Now we're going to get into thoughts, right? We're going to get into that probably chapter like 5 or 6. I don't remember exactly. So I'm not going to get into it too much now, but I want you to understand this concept, right? And it's not a Torah. I mean, it's a Torah concept, but it's a concept that mainstream professionals have adopted completely. Okay. So, and this is part of my passion in teaching, Tanya, is I want people to understand that this is not like Torah to study and to shelve away and just for knowledge. This is real practical stuff that we can really integrate into our lives that works with conventional thoughts and therapeutic behaviors. Does that make sense? Okay. So we know that Tanya is based on our intellect, wisdom, understanding, knowledge. We're going to get into what those terms mean also later on. Remember, we're really just touching upon concepts right now. Then we go into we understand that there's many different types of people. There's 3 different categories. And we understand that we have 2 souls. Okay. We have 2 souls. One's an enlivening soul, a completely selfish soul, and one's a godly soul, which is completely selfless. So if you ever feel like you're crazy, you have 2 opposite things inside of you that are vying for complete control. That is crazy making. Okay. So now we know that it's okay when you feel like, how come one day I'm spiritual? How come 1 hour I'm spiritual and 1 hour I want to throw it all out the window? Oh, because 1 hour your godly soul is working really hard and is succeeding, and the next hour your animal soul or your evil inclination, which we'll get to that later, is working really hard and is winning. Okay, it's not that you're crazy. It's just that this is how we were created. Okay, and what we're going to learn is how to manage this conflict. How do we manage the fact that we have 2 completely opposite entities inside of us that are pulling us in completely opposite directions? How do we manage that? Because we could manage it, right? There are tools to do that. That is the end of the informational part of this class. I have like 3-4 minutes for any questions, and then we'll move on to a short meditation. Any questions? Wow, I made complete sense. That's a first. Come on, guys. Everything makes sense. Even I question myself. Okay. Are there examples of a female tzaddikas? Absolutely. Our matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Rebecca, Sarah. Those are examples of tzaddikas, right? A female, any matriarch or person in the Torah, that's just the Devorah. I mean, any, those are all, I would say those are all examples of a woman tzaddikas. Now, in like practical, like our lives right now, like, I don't know, because I don't know I'm sure there is, I just don't know. I couldn't point you to, oh, that's a tzaddikas. Like, I don't know. Also, we're going to learn later on is that you actually don't know what's going on inside of somebody, right? Like, remember, internal perfection is not something that you can judge. Only God knows that, right? So if God makes it known that like Moshe Rabbeinu is the leader of the generation and he's a tzaddik, then you know he's a tzaddik. But other than that, there can be some hidden tzaddikim running around that you don't know, because you don't know anybody's internal soul. Only God gets to know that. Okay. So, okay, is there a difference between the Yetzer Hara and enlivening soul, or are they saying, okay, very good question. We're going to get to that. There's the enlivening soul, and then there's the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, the thing that drives us to be ungodly. They're interchangeable, but they're also can be like the enlivening soul. The difference is that enlivening soul, like you need it to be alive, right? The Yetzer Hara is more of that drive, the inclination that gets us to do ungodly things. Okay, but we're going to expound on that a little bit more. I hope that helped just for now. What about the idea that you're not your thoughts? 100%. Of course, you can't be your thoughts, right? Like, even, okay, another book I want to recommend, it's not a Torah book, but Solve for Happy. Has anyone ever read that? That book goes into exactly how it's impossible for you to be your thoughts. You can't be your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. Like, you are a person who thinks and has thoughts, but you're not your thoughts. So I 100% on board with that idea. Okay. Yeah. So your thoughts, you can allow your thoughts to define you, but they don't have to define you, right? Like, sometimes we are defined by our thoughts. We have a certain idea and we decide, like, we're going all in, right? We dig our heels in and that's it. But it doesn't have to be that way. It could be that way, but it doesn't have to be that way. Did you say a tzaddik's born that way? Yes, I did. I think there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think in general, there's going to be a tzaddik neshama. There's going to be a soul, a tzaddik soul that comes into this world that's destined to be a tzaddik. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was born, the house was filled with light. He was a baby. He didn't do anything, right? Because his neshama, his soul was destined to be a tzaddik. And I think we'll get into it later. I don't remember exactly, but I think that Torah talks about that. The Tanya talks about that. Like, there's certain souls that are destined to be a tzaddik, and they're usually born that way. Not to say you can't become that way, but it's usually something that you have the soul capacity to do that. Do some people have stronger negative power? We're going to get into that. Some people have stronger negative impulses. It's interesting because the Tanya does not view that as a positive. I mean, some people have less negative impulses. Like, they're just, those goody people that just do good because that's their nature. You might think that that's an advantage, but it actually can be a disadvantage, because what we're going to learn in like chapter, I think it's a 12 or 13, is that really what does God value most is effort. So if you're just coasting and doing good, yeah, great. But where's your effort? Where's your effort in your godliness? And we're going to get to that in a couple chapters. But yes, there's people who are born with a harder, a bigger drive for physicality, or people who are born with a more spiritual inclination, of course. And that just, but everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and then nobody's off the hook, honestly. Like, everyone's going to have something that they struggle with, and the Tanya is going to address it all. So basically, the struggle is real. Hell yeah. The struggle is real. Like, every single day, if you come out with one thing, I want you to understand that you're struggling, because that's what we do. That's why we're here. We struggle, right? Like, there's no, I want anyone to name me one person that they think like that has like a struggle-free life. I don't think that exists. Even Moshe reacted impulsively, running away. So yeah. Okay. I that's a very good point, that even Moshe Rabbeinu had impulse reactions to things that he did get like punished for. I would say that even those impulse reactions, they were godly. They were coming from a godly place. Maybe they were not God's intentions. Maybe God wanted him to do it differently, but they were not like a choice between something ungodly and godly. It was how he perceived the godliness in that moment. But I'm not an expert on that, and that's just my view. Moshe was a tzaddik. That's not an argument, right? Like, we know that he was the ultimate tzaddik. So the fact that he had some missteps, I think they were missteps within spirituality, and also being held to such a crazy standard that none of us can even fathom. Do tzaddikim get reward for good actions if they made no effort? Okay, I love this question. We're definitely going to get into that more in the other chapters. Basically, where God's passion is in the work and in the Beinoni and in the person that's working really hard. Yes, we need tzaddikim. Yes, and I think even tzaddikim will tell you that, like, or I don't know, I'm just saying, I'm assuming that they sometimes almost wish they can have a struggle so they can have that connection with God. I think, of course, they're rewarded for their actions. Of course, they have immense, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, benefits from acting impulsively good all the time. But there's something to be said for the effort, like we spoke about. And that holds extreme value to God, is the effort. Okay, so those are some great questions. I'm going to move on to our meditation, And if there's more questions, put them in the chat box because I can save them. And then Khani's on here from Boss Madel, but I announced in the beginning, I'm going to be making a schmoozy forum for this Tanya class. Anybody can go on there, sign on it. It's super user friendly. And I want to be able to continue this Tanya discussion throughout the week. So if you're like going about your day and you're like, oh my gosh, I have a question. This doesn't make sense to me. Go onto your schmoozy app, go onto the Tanya forum, which I'm going to create. I didn't create it yet. And ask the question, and I can engage with you and answer the question on there. And I'm hoping to be able to have the recording of the video on there as well. I don't know how that technically works, so we'll be talking to Khani. Okay, so anybody who's a meditation expert or knows meditation, I'm sorry, this is going to be really like elementary. Anyone who has never meditated before, great. I'm going to walk you through it. It's going to be 5 minutes, and you don't have to, okay. The first thing I want to say about meditation is don't expect any particular results. Just let it be. Okay. There's no wrong or right way to do it. Don't expect to feel like some great spiritual revelation. I'm telling you, you're definitely not going to feel that. But the reason why I like to end with a meditation is that it kind of grounds us, lets us kind of focus on some particular concepts that we can take with us for the rest of the week. Okay, so everybody get comfortable, preferably with 2 feet on the ground so you have like a firm base. And I want you to take a couple deep breaths with your eyes still open, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Okay, so when you start to feel more in tune with your breath, gently close your eyes and continue breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth. I want you to focus on your breath and allow the breath to lead your mind. And also notice the sensation of your breath, okay? You can even gently put your hand on your belly if you need to, so you can feel like the inhale and the exhale. Follow the rise and fall of the breath and the sensation. And just sit there for a minute. Don't try to control your thoughts. Don't try to do anything except lean into your breath. Is it fast? Is it short? Is it heavy, light, deep, shallow? Don't try to change it, just observe it. Okay, I want you to slowly bring your attention to the words that I'm going to tell you and just think about it to the best of your ability. We have 2 souls, 2 opposing desires. We don't have the tools yet to manage it, but I want you to feel the relief of knowing that there's purpose to the conflict, okay? We feel crazy sometimes, but there's purpose to it and it makes sense. Just lean into that for a minute. As we go through the Tanya, we are going to slowly discover, who am I and what do I want? Okay? We will have a powerful set of tools to manage self-awareness. We will know what we are capable of spiritually and what is beyond our reach. We will be aware of our mental and emotional limitations, but we will continue to challenge them daily, implementing a realistic and effective method. If there's anything I want you to come away with, it's that. It's that we are going to discover who we are. Self-awareness is huge. We are going to understand what we're capable of and what we should let go. We're going to understand and be aware of our mental and emotional capabilities. And we're going to constantly push that boundary. We're going to continue to challenge ourselves and be able to implement a realistic and effective method of managing the conflict. Sit with that for a minute. Bring your attention back to your breath. And when you feel comfortable, you can open your eyes slowly, be gentle. And you made it. You made it through. You survived your first Tanya class. Okay, remember, feedback is really, really helpful. I'm an amateur. This is my first time. So not for my first time giving a Tanya class, but in this kind of forum. And I really want to make it something that's enjoyable for you and the most effective. So, hello. Oh, anyways. Okay. If anyone wants to say anything, you can unmute yourself. If not, look at that, 11:58. We are done. See you here next week, same time. I will let you guys know where to access the recording. And